How's everyone? It's so great to be here. I actually haven't been back in a number of years. Last time I was here, I was with Colson Whitehead talking on the stage, so it's really great to be back all these years later. I thought I would tell you a story that's about rootedness, though it's also a story about rootlessness, I realize. It's a story about 2 road trips, maybe 3 road trips, and an '84 Honda Civic. It was a stick shift, and I had it in San Francisco, where I had driven with a friend of mine from college, and we drove from Kansas, where I had ended up. And I say ended up because my parents were really kind of refugees from the American South. They both grew up in rural Louisiana, and that was what we called home. And so when I think of home, I think of Louisiana, and I think of the country. It's deep country, many parts of it. Where my mother's from, still dirt roads. And where my father's from, they just paved it about 5 years ago. And the streets just got names, and they named them after sort of my cousins and people like that. And my aunt was like, I don't like that. They named it after those silly girls, My grandfather cut this, So we've been in Louisiana, and where my father's from was actually, I saw, was near where y'all are going to end up on the poetry bus. Isn't that going to be amazing? The poetry, SpeakEasy, wagon. So near Lafayette, and then my mother's from northern Louisiana. Those are like 2 different countries. One is a little like Texas, and one is like Louisiana. It's like nowhere else. But so we moved around a lot when I was a kid. So I was in a lot of cars, and we ended up in Kansas. And we moved every 2 years or so. So we moved 6 times before I was 10. And then we end up in Kansas. And I remember after 2 years, I was like, all right, we've been here a couple years. Let's move again. But we didn't. So we stayed there. So after college, I drive out to San Francisco. And so this is the part of the story which is about mainly my first book getting made, taken. In my first book, I was fairly young, and I had a pretty eventful or foundational moment where I went down to Louisiana with my father and was there on that porch, that sort of the mythic porch that one sits on, watching the rain, watching my cousins come by and say hello or not. And it just poured rain. I mean, I'd never seen that kind of rain. And we were supposed to go to this thing called the Zydeco Festival. And everyone was like, well, are we going to go to the Zydeco Festival? I mean, the whole week was like, Zydeco Festival? No Zydeco Festival. And we decided we're not going to go to the Zydeco Festival. A couple years later, I go to the Zydeco Festival, and the way you got to the Zydeco Festival was you drove out of the dirt road, and then you took a right, and there was the Zydeco Festival. It was probably about half a mile. And I was like, wow, But the road was different and difficult. But this is not about that. This is really about my first book. So I had written it pretty young. I was in San Francisco, living in the Mission District, if you know it. And I was packing for the summer because I'd been fortunate enough to get a fellowship back east. And that way I was going to pay for my room by subletting it and live free because, and I was going to New Hampshire, live free or die. So I was, I decided, okay, I'm going to go. And I was with my friend Blue. And Blue was a together guy, so he was packed already. I wasn't packed at all, So I'm madly packing in my one room. But and my phone rings, and this is long enough ago that there were answering machines. Remember those? Some of you, maybe. I was like, no, what do you mean? And they would have tapes, of course, and you could hear, that was the advantage, you could hear someone leaving you the message as they were leaving it. And this message was a message that changed my life. And it was someone who said, hi, this is Dan Halpern of the National Poetry Series. Your book has one, and I picked up the phone, and all I could think, and I told him this recently, is he rejecting me from his magazine again, which was called Antaeus? And he said, hello, you've won the National Poetry Series for your first book. Thank you. Lucille Clifton has picked it. And I was like, Lucille Clifton, who's my favorite poet in the world. Years later, I ended up editing her collected poems after she passed away and getting her papers to Emory University. So I feel very fortunate to have been launched into the world that way. my friend Blue was kind enough to say to me, well, what'd you win? So I told him, and we went and celebrated. We were supposed to leave that afternoon or that morning. I was late, of course. And so we celebrated one more night, had good food, saw a few friends, get on the road. So we get to New York and had a good summer. I went and I rode. I was at the McDowell Colony, which is a wonderful place. And I should say we hit Kansas, and across the way, we were hitting all these sort of high points. And for me, they included Utah, which has great, beautiful, sort of almost outer space seeming places. We hit Kansas, where my family is from, where we're living, and like I said, weirdly, Blue had some family there. So we get to New York, and we're having a good time. It's hot as usual in New York in the summer, and it was that great sort of non-air-conditioned hot that you sit shirtless and just like wait for the oscillating fan to hit you briefly. But so to jump ahead a little bit, had a good summer, wrote. And then at the end of the summer, I realized I have to go back, I have to get back to San Francisco. And I said to myself, who should I call who could help me get across the country in like 3 days? Because I was really late. I was a poet still. I was 22. And I said, who should I call? And I was like, who can, just drop everything and go with me for like a week or maybe two? And so I called up my friend, Colson Whitehead. And Colson Whitehead, who's now a writer, we were old friends. And Cole and I called him and I said, can you drive with me across the country? And he says, give me 1 minute. And he hangs up the phone, and he picks the phone back, he calls me back in like 5 minutes. He says, yeah, I'm in. So Cole is a New Yorker, so he can't drive. So his job then was to smoke and keep me awake. So we get in the car and we drive, and America's a big, vast, fascinating place. And we saw a lot of things, and we're both writers, so he also was taking notes and writing. We got to Kansas. I think I thought I could just do it in like one night. You know how when you're 22, you're like, we'll just stay up all night. I didn't. But we got there, and my grandmother was there, my mother's mother, who's still with us. She's 95 years old. Her birthday's in 2 weeks. And she's a great, powerful, prayerful woman. And I remember being with him, and he sort of understood that. We were friends, like I said, but he also understood sort of where we were from or where I was from. And I remember we were fixing to leave, and she called me aside and she said, here's $5. And I remember thinking and knowing that this was a lot of money. And that $5 meant the world to me. And I knew enough, I didn't necessarily need $5, even though, I was a young writer. I certainly didn't need it like she needed it. But I knew that it was also more than $5. She was sending me on my way. And she did the same with Cole. She pulled him over. And I'll forever love him because he didn't say, oh, no, thank you, or, keep it, or why, or anything that you might say. He said, thank you, and put it in his pocket. So we drive some more. We get to like Colorado. And I think, you know what? I'm so tired of driving. I'm going to teach him how to drive. Mind you, I had a 84 Honda Civic. It's a stick shift. And, I was in San Francisco with a stick shift, if you can imagine. And there I am in, like, Colorado being like, okay, try this, and then try that. It didn't work. We gave up. So, but again, his job was to smoke and keep me up. And I remember we were driving across the plains of Kansas. Kansas, where I was living in Topeka, is pretty rolling. It's pretty hilly for Kansas. But you get out there and it is actually flat. And I remember we had tapes, tape decks. One of the tapes that we had was Balloon Mind State by De La Soul. We listened to that a lot. Mess up my mind, mess up my mind. And then we also had a tape somehow had gotten, which was Allen Ginsberg's Howl. And one side was the 1955 recording, where Ginsberg sounds like, just, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. Very dour. And then he reads it in like the 70s, and he's like, howl, and it was great. And we listened, I think, to the 70s version, and we're looking out on the plains, and it was just beautiful, rapturous, And it was dark. Dusk was falling, the moon. And I remember him saying to me, I want to write a tone poem about John Henry. And I thought, you should. And many years later, he did. John Henry Days, his second book. So I get back to San Francisco. And this is where the story has sort of two parts. One is that I had like dreads. They were somewhat long. They eventually went down to here. I still have them, in case you're wondering. And Cole, I think he had like a fro, or I don't know. But we looked different. I mean, he's like this tall, and I was skinnier too then. So I go and see my roommates. I had the worst roommates on earth. I mean, I would cook, pasta, as one does, and I would cook pasta, and I'd say, would you like some of my pasta? It's like, well, are those organic canned tomatoes, And so they weren't. So we didn't eat together much. And one of them, they had gone to a school in the Midwest, a small liberal arts school, I won't say. And they were, kind of funky. But one of them had finally started, was dating someone, and the boyfriend met me, and I said hello, And then I saw out of the corner of my eye, Cole meet the guy. And the guy says, I already met you. Like, yeah, so he was wrong. So, we're almost at the point of the book getting taken. I mean, the book's been taken. So it's the fall. And I say to myself, I haven't heard from the publisher. It's kind of weird, So I call the publisher, and I get an assistant. The assistant says, hi, and I say who I am, and she says, oh, the editor will call you back about your book. I say, great. And I'm, 22. And I wait a while. I turn 23. I call back, and I say, hi, and it's a different assistant. And this assistant says, oh, she'll call you back, your book, blah, blah. I wait till like January. I mean, it's been like 6 months. And finally I call, and I get the editor. This is not a good sign. It means two assistants. There are no assistants anymore. And she answers and says, oh, I know who you are. I don't know anything about your book. Don't know if it's ever going to get published. As you probably know, this publishing house is going to be sold tomorrow, and I can't tell you anything. This was upsetting, to say the least. And I had felt so good about this book. So I called around, and luckily Dan was really great, and he said, look, something's going to happen. Either you'll go with this person, or you'll stay at this house. Blah, blah. And then a week or so later, they say, everything's different. You're back at this publisher, which was William Morrow, who's no longer really. And I think I closed it. They closed right after my book. But this is, but your book won't be out for a while, it'll be. And in that meantime, I had realized that I had to, fight for my book, which was a good thing, because I ended up saying, this is the cover I want, this is what I want it to be, this is who I am. And so I want to give you one piece of that book, and then tell you a 10-second epilogue. So bear with me, because this is a poem I memorized when I was 19. It's called Eddie Priest's Barbershop and Notary. Closed Mondays. Is music, is men off early from work, is waiting for the chance at the chair while the eagle claws holes in your pockets, is keeping time by the turning of steel fans, steel flowers with cold breezes, is having nothing better to do than guess at the years of hair matted beneath the soiled caps of drunks, the pain of running a fisted comb through stubborn knots, is the dark, dirty, low-down blues, the tender heads of sons fresh from cornrows, all wonder at losing half their height. Is a mother gathering hair for good luck, for a soft wig? Is the round difficulty of ears? The peach-faced boys asking Eddie to cut in parts and arrows, wanting to have their names read for just a few days. And among thin jazz is the quick brush of a dun head, the black flood around your feet. The pain of running a fisted comb through stubborn knots is the dark, dirty, did I repeat it? Low-down blues. Is grandfathers announcing, cut it clean off, I'm through courting and hair only gets in the way. Is the final spin of the chair a reflection of a reflection, the sting of wintergreen tonic on the neck of a sleeping snow-haired man when you realize it is your turn. You are next. So that was what my book was. Thanks. Thank you so much. So the epilogue, really quickly, was that I went, finally, when my book was out, and I went to my publisher, I put on a little thing like this, and I walked up the stairs, I didn't walk up the stairs. I took the elevator, and I went to the counter, and I was standing there, and I was like, I'm in my publisher. I have a publisher. I will be published. And about, 30 feet, pretty far, a guy starts yelling at me, and he's a white guy. He starts saying, hey, are you? And I told you I had dreads. And he said, you. And I sort of ignored him because I don't usually respond to people yell. And then he said, deliveries around the back. That's not where messengers are. And I thought, oh, I am being published. This is publishing. And I don't think publishing has to be that way, of course. But that was my introduction to publishing. And all of that added up to me being here today. And I guess this is my message to you. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good night.